So, does the American right have an intelligence problem? That sounds like a pretty harsh, maybe even rude thing to ask. But the reason I'm asking this is because I've been reading Substacks from right-wing intellectuals, and they've been lamenting on the lack of intellectual curiosity on their side of the aisle. So these three people I will name are Nathan Kaufness, Richard Hananian, and a new one to me, which was Dan Williams. So these are all right-wing intellectuals, I'll characterize them as, that want to see a reduction in federal government, want to see the end of what they call wokeness. So that encompasses DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that stuff for their own various reasons. And one, I think Dan Williams, I still need to read more on him, but he specifically was speaking to the whole misinformation, fake news, and fact checking that we saw in the 2016 election. So the reason why I brought these men up is because they all had a common thread of speaking to in one way or another about how anti-intellectualism on the American right has led to a degradation of conservative Western values, insofar as a lot of conservatives do not control our institutions that are knowledge seeking and knowledge generating. But Nathan Kaufness specifically was saying that this could be a result of the fact that on average, people that lean conservative are not very interested in intellectual pursuits. These men have cited Elon Musk's behavior on X as an example of what they're talking about. So Elon Musk, as a lot of you watching this know, sits on X almost 24/7 and constantly posts misinformation, if not out lies, propaganda, and is not fact-checked at all. All of the fact-checking comes from maybe left-wing people that are watching him, but no one on the right seems to care to fact-check anything he says, and they will just take it and propagate it without any critical thought. And this is a big problem because for someone that is, let's say, a right-wing intellectual, like the guys that I mentioned, how can you stand by your ideas when the main propagators of it are people who do not take intellectual pursuit and fact-checking seriously at all? So this is something that I lamented even in my Death of an American Scientist video, that it went from, in 2019, a scientist was like, okay, this is a person that's intelligent and should be respected, to now nothing we say is correct. Everything is questioned. And yes, I agree. People should question the things that they read for enlightenment purposes and to get the actual real information. Whereas what we're seeing now is just a combative questioning of facts that have already been established, and an attempt to relitigate things like measles vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. But this leaves the right-wing intellectual in quite the conundrum. Why? Because now they've basically been reduced in value. And this is something that Richard Hananian said specifically, that now a right-wing intellectual that does the research, comes up with a cogent argument, and makes a solid case, has about the same intellectual footing as a person that runs the Libs of TikTok page or DC Drano or whatever these like sensationalist MAGA propagandist pages. So it's like you've basically reduced the value of being an intellectual in the right-wing sphere, whereas on the left, being an intellectual is still very much valued. And that's not to say that being an intellectual means you're perfect or everything you say is right, but there's still a respect for pedagogy and the act of learning and acquiring information and changing your mind in light of new information coming towards you. Even Nick Kaufness, who is a person that I find him interesting to read, pretty controversial. I don't agree with what he says. I have to preface that before I get into this. But basically one of his things, the reason why he wants to end wokeness or thinks it's a failed strategy, is because he believes some of the gender and racial differences we see in society are in part hereditary. That is a controversial take, right? But even he will admit that people who are intelligent are way more likely to be woke than they are to accept his premise. Because why? being woke, even though the premise of it, in his opinion, is wrong. So the premise of being woke is essentially the equality hypothesis, which is that all things being equal, everyone has the same abilities to achieve intellectually, physically, what have you, what have you. So if you are someone that's on the left side and you're woke, if you believe in the equality hypothesis, the only answer to that is there is some type of gender-based, race-based, ethnicity-based bias that is keeping people down, right? So that's the logical conclusion. Even though in his opinion, the premise is wrong, people who are woke are actually being faithful to their own argument because wokeness is the logical conclusion of the equality hypothesis. Whereas people on the right, a lot of the times, and he will even admit it, not everyone, but a lot of them are against wokeness because of their own prejudices versus any type of peer-reviewed and studied differences between groups that could partially explain some of the things that we're seeing. It seems what is happening in general is that some of these right-wing intellectuals are finding that in their attempt to call back or roll back PC culture, rolling back misinformation, characterizing things that you don't like as misinformation, calling back DEI and wokeness as they call it, one of the unintended consequences is they latch themselves onto a candidate who has ushered in an age of complete intellectual free-for-all. Like I said before, we're in a post-logic, post-truth society now where people don't need facts. They just need their own opinion and they just run with that. So one of the unintended consequences of that is that now you've essentially flattened the reach of an intellectual. That person does not have the same value because everything has been reduced to entertainment value, which is why the people love Twitter. This is why a lot of these MAGA people really wanted to see the Epstein files. Is it because they care about assault victims? That can't be, because they are in love with the Tate brothers. They love it for the Jerry Springer-esque effect. And you can't build a society, you can't build an institution, an intellectual institution, with people whose thirst for knowledge stops at the Epstein files. That is not sustainable. So while, like I said, it doesn't seem that they regretted their vote, they are realizing and coming to terms with the fact that they've latched onto the wrong candidate. I know people, lesser of two evils, everyone that votes politically and is somewhat conscious is familiar with that concept, but this is actually pretty bad for them. In the case of, I think it was Nick Kaufness, or not Nick, I'm sorry, my apologies, Nathan Kaufness, he said that one of the unintended effects of this is if the Trump-Musk administration messes this thing up so poorly, the opposite of what they want will happen. Like if you screw up the bureaucracy enough, if you screw up the government enough, if you ruin enough things for people to notice, you will actually get a return to wokeness, because in comparison, being woke looks way more competent than whatever is going on currently. So this is just something that's been on my mind, something I noticed, and I thought I'd share with you all. Just some of my ramblings and thoughts.